Okay, so going back to what we call the third theory in Adam Walks Around number 48, which is what I roughly think happened. There are basically four sort of refinements to the theory that I want to talk about. And so to get into that, I'll, as best as I can, walk back through the theory that I explained in episode 48. And at the points where I think something slightly different might have happened, I'll talk about it. So as we discussed previously, the theory is that after an early hike at Lost Horse Mine, Bill attempted to do a second hike, an ascent of Quail Mountain. He got a late start, probably took the Juniper Flats Jeep Trail from the Trailhead, and did not realize that it wasn't the same trail that was shown on his map, which was the California Riding and Hiking Trail, which is parallel above it. And that he hiked along that road until he got to Juniper Flats and then attempted an ascent of Quail Mountain, but went up a route that, while it looked viable to get to the summit, actually dead ends, and he would have had to have turned around, and at that point he no longer had enough time or daylight to reroute up to Quail and had to abandon his ascent. And just an addendum here, one of the many things about the maps that was wonky at the time was, although they didn't show the trail that Bill most likely took in, the Tom Harrison map of the time, at least, did show a trail going up to Quail Mountain on roughly the track that he may have gone on. And that trail doesn't really exist. There are a lot of footpaths up to it, and there is sort of a rough route people take. But again, this may have played a role in confusing Bill and maybe having him take the wrong path up Quail. But the thing is, this route up Quail, there's nothing fatal about it, and he would have turned back around. But the reason that we think he might have taken this route is a bandana was found by search parties in an area just below the point where Bill would have had to have turned back if he'd taken this, what Tom Hood called a sucker's route. In other words, a route up the mountain that looked good but wasn't. So what one of the commenters said, and I should have written their name down, I apologize, you know who you are, that I thought was a really brilliant idea was, the thinking is that Bill at this point would have been running quite late. It would have been a longer and more unpleasant trip in than he suspected, and that he might have gotten out a more detailed map and realized at that point that there were actually two routes back to the car, and tried to go back on the southern route, not realizing he had come in on the southern route because he, according to his map, was following the northern route because the map only showed one route. So in other words, he would have, trying to find the road back, looked for the road he actually had come in on, and then inadvertently took a wrong turn onto a different road, which would have looked very similar to the road he was on and the road he was expecting to see, since it was constructed over an old Jeep trail, which is what the map that he was looking at would show. I know it's kind of complicated, but the point is that at some point for this to happen, he would have had to have gotten his map out and go, right? Okay, so what the commenter suggested is, what if the bandana fell down at the point when Bill got that map out, either from getting it out of his pocket or getting it out of his pack or whatever. He made a move that made the bandana drop. And I think that's actually a really likely, because the point where that bandana was found, and again, we don't know for sure it was Bill's, but there aren't a lot of people out there at this time of year. And if that bandana was fairly fresh, and we knew he wore bandanas, it's pretty likely that it was Bill's. So think about this. Bill goes up, tries to get up Quail, can't get up, so now he's got to turn around, and now he's going, well, crap, I can't get back up, now I got to get home, and it took me forever to get in, there's got to be a better way to get back. So he gets the map out, and at that point, whatever move he makes the bandana fall. And at the point where that bandana was found, it's at a height of land, you've got a really good view of the whole area around. It's not an obvious place to go off trail, because that was one of the theories, is that he had dropped the bandana to mark a place where he left the trail. But it is a really good place to get your map out and look around and see the terrain and the landscape. that's kind of what that spot is. So this makes perfect sense. And we can squeeze a little more juice out of the lemon because since this bandana fell, and Bill apparently didn't notice, I mean, there's some theory that he dropped it on purpose, but there's no real reason to think that, right? Why waste a bandana? So if the bandana falls out of his pocket or wherever he's got it, that suggests to me it's later in the day than I originally thought, which is about 4 p.m. is what I thought would be the time he would be at this point. But if the bandana is probably already off, and even if it's not, he doesn't bother to put it on again. He doesn't miss it, right? So that implies to me that the sun's no longer that high in the sky. So that makes me think, now let me think about this a little bit. There would be the sun would be setting in the west. At that point, there would be some blocking from the west side, but not much, because the Quail Mountain would be to his north. So that would indicate to me that the sun's lower in the sky, and it might be 4:30 or 5. So at that point, he's already supposed to be calling his fiance to tell him he's out of the park, and instead he's, you know, a good 2.5 hours away from the car. So he might have been under some pressure and kind of gone, crap, I gotta get back. So is there another way? And it's also possible that he might have tried to call at that point. That could have been another thing that he did. Okay, I'm late, I gotta get a call out, I'm gonna be late. But there's no cell coverage on the side of the mountain. There is on the other side of the mountain, but you know, there's no reason to think that Bill would know that, and you know, he never made a call from there, so obviously he didn't. So these two things together sort of strengthen the idea to me that Bill went up this sort of false trail on the Tom Harrison map, or just went up the route that looked the most viable to him. Got to a point where he realized he couldn't go any further, backtracked, gets out the map and or the phone, but I think the map for sure, to see where he's at. Bandana falls, doesn't notice it because he's stressed and he doesn't need it anymore because he's not hot, the sun's not right on his head anymore. And then makes whatever decision he makes about how he's going to get back. And I think whether you think what I think happened or not, I think that him being late and the maps being inaccurate or misleading, I think this plays a direct role in what happened to Bill. I'm pretty sure about this part. So then, according to my theory, the next part, Bill heads back down the road. He misses the actual California riding hiking trail because it's small and it's not marked, and he gets to a fork of 2 old Jeep trails. This is exactly what he's expecting because the topographical map shows a Jeep trail going all the way back to his car. He thinks that he came in on the dotted dash, which is the trail, but he actually came in on that Jeep trail. But if he's conditioned to think he's looking for this other way back, he might think the Stubbe Springs Loop is this other road back. So he goes down Stubbe Springs expecting to take another way, parallel way back to his car. And initially, the directions are not that dissimilar, and the way is actually a lot nicer, it's cooler, so it could have lulled Bill into a false sense of security. While we're discussing the bandana, let me break in. If you have trouble with the part of this theory where Bill chooses a different way back based on misleading maps, which would certainly be a risky thing to do under the circumstances, an alternate scenario shook out in the comments for the video where he would have gotten lost down the same route trying to take the same way back. Now, there's no specific path back down from Quail Mountain, and at the point the bandana was dropped, Bill might well have been trying to work out how to get back to the road he came in on. Now, this particular commenter had actually hiked Quail Mountain and said that they themselves had almost gotten lost on the climb down because they had passed the California Riding and Hiking Trail, which, as I've said before, is small and poorly marked, and continued south without realizing it. When theorizing about what happened to Bill, I had earlier rejected this possibility because looking at Google Earth and the maps, it would seem that the Jeep trail Bill had come in on would be easily visible from up Quail Mountain. And it probably would have been, but surprisingly, as we can see in this photo, from the lower vantage point the bandana was dropped at, it was not. So, if Bill was sighting his way back towards the road from this point, but was a little too far to the west from the road, and then missed or shrugged off the intersecting California riding and hiking trail as this commenter did, continuing on that route, he would very soon run right into the trail I believed he got lost on, the Stubbe Springs Loop. Now, at this point, the Stubbe Springs Loop and the Juniper Flats Road on which Bill came in look identical. They appear to have been constructed at the same time and by the same means, and as I said before, the Stubbe Springs Road was not shown on the park map. As far as Bill knew, and as far as I knew before I came to the region, there was only one Jeep trail in the area. So, once again, if Bill is working his way back trying to find a Jeep trail and he finds one, he's probably going to take it. Except in this scenario, instead of thinking he was on an alternate route back to his car, he'd think he was on the road he came in on, and going back the way he came would, of course, have been the safest and most logical thing to do. At least at first, the terrain and the road would be similar enough that with confirmation bias at work, Bill likely wouldn't notice the difference, particularly if he had started to lose light. And when he finally did, he'd be utterly confused where he actually was, since there was only one road on the map, once again, and depending on what maps he did or did not have, could have done any number of things. But in this particular scenario, Bill couldn't simply backtrack and be sure he'd find his way out because he would have lost his original point of reference, and depending on where he guessed his location to be, he might have gotten lost trying to dead reckon a path back to the road without a clear idea where it actually was. Though I wouldn't have thought this was a plausible scenario just going by Google and the maps, based on the first-hand report of this commenter, it could certainly have happened this way, and that would put Bill in exactly the same sticky situation as the original theory, but without Bill having had to make the questionable decision to go back by a different route. In this scenario, Bill was just trying to get back the way he came, and he got messed up by the bushwhack back from Quail Mountain. But this gets to the second part, and this has always been the part I've been kind of squirrely about, is I think Bill had to have gone down the Stubbe Springs Loop. Your mileage may vary, and that's fine. But I think this had to happen because I think Bill had to come up Covington Wash, which is to the west of every other route he might have taken north. And I talked about this in episode 48, but basically none of the other routes north, I can't imagine any logical reason for him to go that way. But if Bill gets lost on the loop and it gets dark and he can't find his way back the way he came, he's going to wind up in Covington Wash because it'll be the only way that he can travel at night. It's the only big clear path in that area. And the topography around that area, because once you kind of go down the Stubbe Springs Loop, you don't really notice it when you're going into it, but you're kind of in a bowl surrounded by fairly, I don't want to call them mountains, but there's no easy way back unless you take the road back once you're into that area. So if you lost the road and couldn't find it, to get back, and that would easily happen at night or at dusk, and I talked about why that was in episode 48, you wouldn't be able to navigate back to the main trail. It would be, you would run into the hills, you'd have too much terrain between you and that. So you would wind up to the west in Covington Wash. So I'm pretty convinced this is how it must have gone down. He goes down Stubbe Springs, darkness happens, he's in the wash, he goes north, because at that point now it makes sense for him to go north, because he has a north-south path. South's going to take him to Palm Springs, he doesn't want that. North will eventually take him back to the trail, so north, okay? But how does he get lost? Because he's following this old road. And what I said in episode 48 is there are a couple of places he could have gotten off. There's one small wash that goes off, and there's one big wash where the road actually drops into a wash, starts following the wash, and then it enters another wash at an angle. And at that point, the trail that goes to Stubbe Springs, the continuation of the trail that Bill is following, but he doesn't know he's following, goes on out at a sharp angle, but you wouldn't necessarily notice it. You would be more likely to go down this wash, and this is what searchers in the beginning thought might have happened. This is where these stones magically appear, seemingly not long after Bill disappeared. This is the most likely place for Bill to go wrong. But what I said in episode 48 is I thought that there would be enough daylight left where Bill would realize this mistake, backtrack, find the trail, get to Stubbe Springs, see the sign at Stubbe Springs, and go, oh shit, I'm in a place that I don't want to be, And then he would have had to have made a choice between backtracking the way he came or continuing on the Stubbe Springs loop. And my thought was that he might have decided to keep going down the loop because he would salvage more of his hike. It was about the same distance, and he still might make up time if it was a better trail. But honestly, that would not have been a bright move. And I mean, if I was in his position, would I have done it? I gotta admit, I might have made the not bright move, so it's easy for me to believe that he did, but it would have made more sense to backtrack at that point. So, and then he's heading the wrong direction, so then I had this whole scenario where at some point he backtracks, can't find the road again, and then so he has to keep going to the Covington Wash. That's all still possible, okay? I think that's all possible, but because the part of the theory I was least convinced of. And afterwards, I thought about it, and there's a key part of this that when I'm putting myself in Bill's shoes, that I wasn't really thinking of, and that is, Bill thinks he's following an old road. Now, old roads there are barely more than trails, but you're talking about something more than just a little track and a couple of rocks behind it. You're talking about something that's at least 2 meters wide, where some motorized vehicle could have made it down at some point in human history, okay? So he's following the road, it goes into a wash. A lot of washes are wide enough that you can drive down them, and in fact, that seems what happened here. The road went into the wash. Whoever used this road for whatever reason, probably to go to the spring, kept going down the wash, and then they stopped short of the spring and did whatever they did. I don't know the history of this road. But at the point where the trail actually came out of the wash, not only is it difficult to see it, and it wouldn't be obvious, but Bill wouldn't have been looking for it because it's a trail. It's obviously something that never was a road. It's too narrow. The rate of ascent is too steep. You know, something that's basically built over the rolling side of a hill. It wasn't a road. So even if Bill saw it, he wouldn't go, oh, that's the trail. I need to keep going on it. He would have gone, I'm on a road. That's not a road. This wash must be where I go. And if he kept going down the wash, he would have eventually gotten to Covington Wash, which it goes into, but he would have had to have gone down a lot of fairly steep declinations to get there. So at that point, again, he should have known he wasn't on a road. And also, I think at that point, he would have known he was going the wrong direction. But what would he do then? Would he go back to find the trail? I think he probably would have gone back down the other side of the wash or gotten out of the wash and tried to look for places the road would have gotten out of the wash. At a certain point, I think he would have tried to backtrack. But as I explained in the episode 48, once he got out of the wash, he might have trouble figuring out which wash was the one he came in on, because there's a lot of washes that go through there. And the road, the path of the road is not really that clear. So once he leaves the original wash and gets into the bigger wash, which I think is very likely, he might not have been able to tell which wash was his. And also, if it's an hour later than we thought it was, darkness is going to fall that much faster. So this is a long way of saying, I suspect Bill never got to Stubbe Springs, because I don't think he would have taken note of the trail coming out of the wash. And if that's the case, he would have been even more confused, because he might have still been trying to make his landmarks fit where he thought he was. And if they didn't, he would be wondering where the heck on his map he actually was. Because the Stubbe Springs loop, as shown on the maps of the time, it would not have the intersection with the main road looked completely different from what he had gone down. The topographical map might have steered him right if he'd figured it out, so that could have done it. But with darkness falling and him in a hurry, and he couldn't be 100% sure whether he was here or there, and he's going to have very limited options to figure out where he's at. And once he gets out of the original wash he came in on, he could easily get confused as to trying to find his way back to that wash. And if he's out of that wash and he tries to dead reckon back to the road, From the side, that road doesn't look real obvious. So there's a bunch of different ways he could have gotten lost here, but I sort of suspect he never got to Stubbe Springs. Now, I want to talk a little bit about one of Tom's objections to my theory is Tom has said that he believes that he was never at Stubbe Spring because if he had, Bill would have called home, and there's coverage near Stubbe Springs for the phone. It's the only place in the whole area where there is. It's true, but the coverage for Stubbe Springs is actually in one specific spot. It's on this ridge high above that sort of main wash I was telling you about that I think he wound up in by mistake. If he didn't climb up that wash and he'd have no way of knowing for sure there would be cell reception up there, then he would have never gotten a call out. So I don't think it immediately follows that because he didn't do that, he was never there. But it does tell us that he didn't climb up that ridge. So we can be fairly sure of that. So whatever else he did or didn't do around Stubbe Springs, he didn't climb that height of land to get a sense of the terrain. And that ever so slightly points me back to the idea that if he went towards Covington Wash, in that big wash, once he saw that steep drop down into the Covington Wash, he probably would have gone, oh, this isn't the right way, and gone back the other way. And then come out of the wash, and then as he bushwhacked back to try and hit the road, that he got lost and passed where the road was and wound up in Covington Wash. Because I think if he was lost at that point, it would have been a logical move for him to climb that bluff. Now, it would have been difficult, so I can see why he might not have done it. But there's no way to really know how he got off Stubbe Springs into Covington Wash, but it's a very easy move to make. Like almost everything that could have gone wrong for him in that region, once night falls, he's going to wind up in Covington Wash because he has no viable way to travel any other direction in the dark. If it was still light, I think he could have gotten out. But I think everything to me points to he gets down Stubbe Springs and he loses light and he winds up in Covington Wash and he goes north. So this brings me to the third sort of adjustment to the theory. And again, all this stuff is pretty obscure. This is just for those of you that are really, really deep in the weeds in this mystery. For those of you that can't follow what I'm saying, basically, I still believe what I said in episode 48. But for those of you like me that really like to get into the details, I think there's a little more we can guess from this scenario. And the next thing is, what I had said is that Bill would have gone north up Covington Wash until he got to the California Riding Hiking Trail, at which point he would have been so much closer to the trailheads to the north than to his car that he would have decided to seek help there rather than try to make the arduous trip back to his car. And I still think that's basically what happened, but I think it probably happened earlier than I said. I said that probably happened late Friday morning. I now think it probably happened quite early Friday morning, and it again goes back to the darkness thing. Because one thing I noticed later is that the path of Covington Wash going north at a few points passes pretty close to the California Riding and Hiking Trail. And if Bill passed those areas in daylight, I think he could have and would have navigated over to the trail, assuming he knew by then where he was, and I think he probably had guessed by then because of the wash being such a big landmark. And at that point, if he'd hit the trail, it wouldn't have made sense for him to keep going north. I think he would have just gone back to his car because the distances were roughly the same. But he didn't do that. And that indicates to me that at that point in his travel north in the wash, it was dark. So whether that means he frittered away a lot of time kind of in the Stubbe Springs area in the dark, or whether he stopped and rested or whatever, I think he was probably walking all night up Covington Wash, and he winds up at the California Riding Hiking Trail fairly early Friday morning. And at that point was when he would have made the decision to go north to Upper Covington, because that's the nearest trailhead. So again, from that point, I think it's, what I would have done, and I think what any hiker with a map would have done, is go to the nearest trailhead, Upper Covington. There's nobody there, and it's hot as balls, and it's going to get hotter as the day ascends. So I think by mid-morning he's going to leave. Then there's a trail that runs through a shaded canyon that goes to another trailhead. And there's a dry spring on that trail. So it would make sense to take that trail, get undercover, look for water, because his water's got to start being a concern at this point. We know he had a lot, but now he's been out a lot longer than he expected, so he's probably running low on water. The spring would have been dry, so the next logical move would be to go to Lower Covington, which is a slightly less remote trailhead. But as I said in episode 48, people just don't go out there in the summer. But the biggest objection people made to this theory, Tom made it too, and I think it's a very valid objection, is, look, I'm in a trailhead, there's nobody there, but there's a road right there. All I gotta do is walk up that big, wide, fairly flat road, 7 miles, and I'm to civilization. And Bill had a map, he would know that. Why didn't he go? Well, I think you have to look at the timeline and put yourself in Bill's shoes to understand why this would have happened. Because under this timeline, and once we get Bill into Covington Wash, the rest of it, I think, flows pretty obviously. I mean, he might have done a bunch of things. He might have stopped to sleep. He might have tried to climb somewhere to get cell reception. He might have tried to bushwhack over this way or that to get back to the trail. A lot of things he might have done, but I think basically, if he winds up north of Quail, and he doesn't do it because he goes on some crazy loop trail that me or Tom theorized about, then this is how he goes. And this is why he goes. Because it's his only way out, and by the time he gets up there, it's a more attractive prospect than going back to his car. But what that means is by the time he gets to Lower Covington, he's been walking now for 2 days straight. He's had little or no sleep. He's running low on water, and he's probably exhausted. And you're thinking, well, it doesn't matter. He's on his way out. He's just got 7 miles, so he can power through. Easy. Okay, first of all, easy for you to say. You're not in that situation. But there's another thing to think about. What time are we talking about here? We're talking about Friday night. It's the beginning of the weekend. So if there's going to be anyone coming to these trailheads, it's going to happen on Friday or Saturday night, because that's the weekend. That's when people mostly visit the park. Also, Bill doesn't know they haven't found his car yet, so he has to be hoping that a ranger's going to come along and find him. And one logical place for a ranger to look for him is the trailheads. And in fact, that's exactly what they did. Unfortunately, they didn't do it until Sunday morning. But so he has every reason to believe that it's worth taking a night to get some sleep because he's exhausted. And Lower Covington's a more comfortable place to bivouac for the night than any place he's already been. And hope that someone's going to show up Saturday, whether it's someone showing up to do some camping for the weekend or a ranger. Or maybe someone will show up Friday night. He doesn't know. But it makes a lot of sense for him to just like, I'm done in. I've been up for 30, 40 hours now. I've walked 20 miles. I can't move another step. I'm almost out of water. He may have not even had any choice at that point. He may have just fallen asleep. But I think that's what happened. I just don't think he was physically capable of walking out that night. So then you're going, well, why didn't he walk out the next day? That part's easy. There's no cover whatsoever on that road. And again, if you've never been there, if you're doing this as a theoretical exercise, you're thinking, well, so what? No cover, 7 miles, you're out of water, you're already half sunstroked. And you can tell this from the road, and I can tell you this myself because I've walked that road, because I did a couple of walks down that road thinking maybe Bill tried to do this and passed away in the process. So I walked along the road looking on the side, looking for remains, and there was almost no shade that whole damn way, and you could see there was no shade. So even if Bill started walking up that road, once he got high enough to look, he's like, I ain't doing this. Because I think he would have gone, I can't make it. Okay? So then he would have gotten some rest. He'd be feeling a little bit better. By midday Saturday, he knows no one's coming. There's not likely to be anyone on the road for any other reason, because it doesn't really lead anywhere else. He's got to be running low on water. So what do we know now he had? He had a trail guide. Okay? That trail guide probably, like the maps of the time, or it may have been one of the maps, we don't know, showed a trail going through Smithwater Canyon. It may have also shown that there was an active spring in Smithwater Canyon. It probably also showed that there was a trail going up the wash where we know he wound up and eventually perished, or above that wash. So he's looking at the map going, okay, I can wait till 9 or 8 or whatever time the sun's going to get low enough for me to go up this road. 10 more hours or whatever with no water and sitting out here in the heat. Because there isn't a lot of cover, lower cover in either. It's just more. Or it looks like there's a trail just down below. Looks like there's water, maybe a mile away. And this looks like a much faster straight shot. There's trails the whole way. It's only 5 miles and I'm out. So if you look at it that way, it makes a lot of sense that Bill didn't take the obvious way out, because according to all the information that he had available to him, there was probably water and then there was a trail all the way back, and it was a lot shorter than that stuff. And did I mention he's in a canyon, so he's undercover. He's not in direct sunlight. That would have been a very big deal to him. So if I'm Bill, with that set of facts, I'm going down Smithwater Canyon. It makes perfect sense to me. Now, we don't know if there was water in the canyon. There may have been, there may not have been. I suspect that there wasn't. There certainly was no trace of water found in the bottles. Now, that probably would have evaporated over 12 years anyway, but if it was sealed in a bottle, would it have? I don't know. But anyway, doesn't look like he had water. But we can't be sure that there was water flowing at that time because it was the height of summer anyway. But what do we absolutely know? That there is no trail through Smithwater Canyon to speak of, and there's actually some pretty nasty obstacles to get over, including a pretty big dry waterfall that Tom once suspected might have been where Bill got injured, and I suppose it's possible that he did. But at any rate, it would have been a much tougher walk through Smithwater Canyon than he thought. But once he was in the canyon and had gone far enough to the spring, whether he knew it was there or not, and if there's a guidebook and he had maps, pretty good chance he knew, and even if he didn't, he knew it was called Smithwater Canyon. So it would have been worth a look, right? Because it's still, even if there's no water there, he thinks it's the quickest way out and there's trails the whole way. But there's not. So it could have taken him a lot of the rest of the day to get through Smithwater Canyon because of all the obstacles he would have had to overcome. But by that time, he's committed. Now it's 10 miles away the other way. He's only got 3 miles to go if he keeps going, so of course he's going to keep going. So he gets to the end of the canyon. There's a bunch of places at the canyon mouth to bivouac. I identified a lot of them on my first hike out there. In fact, I took a picture of the best candidate and I put it up on the show. And then from there on, there's not much question about what happened. He went up that wash thinking it was the quickest way through. He probably expected there to be a trail to follow. There wasn't. And then he kept going up the wash. And again, remember, he keeps going up a wash when a trail comes out of it that's not immediately obvious. And this is very close to what I think happened to him when he first got lost, when I think he was on the Stubbe Springs Loop. So, we know that he was capable of that mistake, right? So, and then he has to correct, and he has to go up a very steep hill, and that ends him. So that's what I think happened. And but we have to also acknowledge there is a possibility that Tom's theory, we can't rule it out. I've already gone over why I don't think it's the most likely, but it's certainly plausible. It's not a crazy theory. So the thing to take away from all this is there's no question about a couple, or there's virtually no question about a couple things. One is that Bill was a complete badass, and he almost made it out. He was a mile away, and whether he went up that thing after having walked 28 miles in the sun, or whether he went up that thing with a broken ankle, a couple poles, either way, the man showed heroic determination and stamina and guts in getting as far as he did. And the other thing I want to say is, a number of people in the comments have pointed out it was foolhardy of Bill to hike alone, to not leave a clear message about where he was going, about not backtracking exactly the way he came, if that's what he did. All these things are true, but if there's one thing that's emerged as we've had fuller understanding of what happened and what was found with Bill, he was a lot better prepared than we thought he was. He had a camelback, he had extra water, he had a bunch of maps, he had hiking poles. He wasn't a complete greenhorn idiot. He made a couple of mistakes that, you know, similar to ones I've made, right up there in those mountains, you know, here in Bali. You know, I did something not long ago, a couple of days ago. I wanted to get from one ridge A to ridge B, and there was a guy I found up there, and he guided me over the trail, and I didn't have a hiking pole with me, and I have a wobbly knee from an old injury, and without a hiking pole, it was a damn dangerous trail, and I nearly went over the cliff. Now, and I didn't tell anybody that's where I was going. There's nobody to tell. I'm in the middle of Indonesia, but, you know, and they would have, you know, they would have been able to pick my carcass out of the pit and take me home. But the point is, you know, it was a trail I took without really knowing what I was getting into, and I could have really hurt myself. I didn't. I got out of it. But every backcountry hiker watching this, we all know, even though we're not supposed to do this, we're not supposed to do that, we all have done things in the name of, well, it's just one more trail, just one more this, one more that. We've all done it. The one thing he should have done was tell somebody where he was going. But I understand why he didn't, because his plans changed on the fly, and there wasn't really any cell reception in the places that he went. And it was just dumb luck that his car, well, and incompetence that his car wasn't found earlier than it was. So he had every reason to expect people would be looking for him sooner than they were. It seems very clear to me that Bill made a lot of decisions that were actually pretty rational, and he was let down by the maps that he had. And based on the circumstances he was in and the information that he had, I think that he got off the trail because of the maps being misleading. And I'm quite sure that he went up that last wash of his instead of going around to the south, which would have been much easier, and he probably would have made it if he had, because those maps showed that it was the quickest way through, the topography was forgiving, and probably because it showed trails going through it that were not really there, and to the extent they were not really followable. And that's not really on the map makers. That's, I believe, on Joshua Tree National Park. I think they knew they had a problem. I think they've done their best to rectify it. Those trails are now much more obvious. They're now clearly marked. Whatever directive, if there was one, to the map makers to show these trails, or whatever master map they were going off of, that was revised, and those trails that weren't there were taken off the later maps. So they fixed the problem. But I think it's important to remember that Bill did something really heroic, and also that he made a lot of decisions that were logical based on the information that he had, and he was just let down by that information. And that is pretty much all we are ever going to know about the fate of William Michael Ewasko. And this is probably the last video I'm going to make on this topic. I know a lot of you are only on this channel to follow this story, and for those of you that are going to sort of peace out at this point, I want to thank you for your kind words and making me feel like I did the story justice. It was really important to me to put a period on all this and do it in a way that was respectful of what Bill did, and also correct any misperceptions I may have put out there in my well-meaning attempts to piece together this mystery in the earlier days. That thinking did evolve over time. That's what you're supposed to do when you get new information. But I want to make absolutely sure that I left people with what, as I said, is, I think, the truest story that we can tell, which is that Bill, you know, nearly saved his own life, and he came really, really close to doing it. There is a lot of other really cool content on this channel. The Adam Walks Around series has a lot of other episodes, and the Ewasko story has encouraged me to work harder to tell better stories and also look for ways to fuse this idea of mystery and solving puzzles with the theme of the show, which is hiking and exploration and travel. If you haven't checked out the following episode, episode 49, Mystery Road, which tackles a different kind of desert mystery, I encourage you to do so. There's also a lot of music content on this channel. So if you would like to stay with Karma Frog One channel, I would love to have you stay with it. But if that isn't an area of your interest, I just want to thank you for your kind words and your viewership. And I hope that I've done my best to tell this story fairly and honestly and with respect. So thank you, everyone. And I'll leave you with some shots of the beautiful Bali scenery outside my window. And if you want to see more of it, episode 43, No Starbucks in Ahmed, will give you much more of that. And that's all I'm going to say. So enjoy your day. Bye.